Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir daf Lamed Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Liam Philip in honor of her daughter Nechama Sarah on the occasion of her first birthday. We have listened to the podcast together since before she was even born. May we continue to learn Talmud together for years to come. Happy birthday. Today's daf is sponsored by Sylvia Sarah Devara Simmons in memory of her father, Avram Nachum Ben Yisrael Simmons Zichrono Livracha, and his yurtzeit, survivor of Kavno Ghetto, a brand plucked from burning fire. Today's daf is anonymously sponsored anonymously in memory of Moshe ben Amram, Moshe Rabbeinu, and his yurtzeit. And fortunately, our daf is also sponsored in memory of Ilan Ganelis, who was murdered yesterday. Okay. Again, prayers for quieter days. We're going to start from the bottom of Lamed He Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Yavau, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is a statement that's going to take us throughout today's daf. There's a study guide to help you see the flow. Rabbi Yavau says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kol isurin shebetorah en heiter mitztaref liisur chutz miitzurei Nazir sharei amra Torah mishrat. So the Torah, as we saw yesterday, listed this word mishrat anavim, which means something soaked in wine, which sounds like the object itself that's soaked in wine is going to be forbidden based on the requisite amount of that item, which is soaked in wine, which means if you were to eat a kazayit of bread that has wine soaked in, this we saw also the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishna, then you would be liable for lashes, or you'd be forbidden. Whatever you did is forbidden by Torah law, even though there's not a kazayit of yayin in there, or a revid of yayin, whatever shiur you go by, it doesn't matter because the Torah says the combination is a problem. This, says Rabbi Yochanan, in addition to the fact that Rabbi Akiva said it, he says this halacha is only by Nazir because of the pasuk. And with that, he basically says this concept of heiter mitztaref liisur, let's just explain the concept clearly. Heiter item combines with an isur item and forbids the whole combination, so that if you now, it's as if, right, normally we say about dine bitul, right, things overpower the other. In this case, it's the opposite direction, where a small amount of isur is going to basically make a larger amount of heter into isur. Okay, that's a unique halacha which only applies by Nazir. Comes Zeiri, and he says, Af se'ol bebal taktiru. He says, there's another place where this is true. There's a pasuk that says, and I brought this pasuk in your daf, on the study guide, Kol mincha asher takrivu la'Hashem, any mincha offering you bring to God, lo ta'aseh chametz, it cannot be leavened. He calls se'ol, because any leavening, v'chol dvash, or any honey, lo taktiru mimenu yishalashem. There's two things you can't do. This se'or they're pointing out right now, as the Zeiri comes and says, it says kol se'or, which sounds like any bit of se'or can't be burnt on the altar. You can't bring a mincha that's leavened on the altar. So comes Zeiri and he says, same thing with se'or, because what it means is if you bring, now he assumes that it doesn't mean any little amount. It means you still need a kazayit to go on the altar to be liable. You'll only get punished if you brought a kazayit, but it doesn't need to be a kazayit of something leavened. If you bring a kazayit of a mincha, where part of it is leavened and part of it is not leavened, but you have altogether a kazayit, that's another case of heiter mitztaref liisur. That's what Zeiri says, the kol comes to include. So which the Gemara questions him and says, Keman, according to who are you going? To Rabbi Eliezer? You're going like Rabbi Eliezer, who's didarish kol, because he darshans this word kol, where? In a different context. In chametz, kol machmetzet, lo tochelu, you can't eat any bit of chametz, to which Rabbi Eliezer learns, that comes to teach you by chametz also heiter mitztaref liisur. If you eat a combination of something that has a little bit of chametz in it, you're liable by Torah law. So if he's darshaning like Rabbi Eliezer, and the Zeiri comes up with this kol, where does he come up with it? He must be relying on some Tana. What Tana says this? Rabbi Eliezer. But Rabbi Eliezer says it, ihachi l'inyan chametz nami. So why does Zeiri say just se'or? He should have said se'or on the mizbeach, on the altar, and chametz in food on Pesach. So why didn't he say that? To which the Gemara says, inachinami. He does hold like Rabbi Eliezer, and he does hold the same thing by se'or, by chametz. It's not that he said se'or specifically in the mincha offering because only that case. No, He meant in other cases as well. So why did he specifically bring the Seor example? That's for a different reason. He wanted to teach us two things. Abaye had a different opinion about the Seor in the first place. Seor on the altar, I said, you're only liable if the Seor is mixed in with, let's say, matzah, a matzah type of offering, and all together you put a kazayit on the altar because there's a requisite amount to be liable for putting things on the altar. Abaye disagrees with this. Abaye thinks if you put a little bit of Seor on the altar, a mincha made with that leavened, and a very small amount, less than an olive, you're actually going to be liable. So the reason why Zeiri said this was, number one, he wanted to show he disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan about heiter mitztaref lisur is true in other cases as well. And in addition, now the whole concept of heiter mitztaref lisur goes against Abaye, certainly in the Seor case, because Abaye says when it comes to burning things on the altar, any little amount, you don't even need a requisite amount. Now, heiter mitztaref lisur is all about requisite amounts. If you don't need a requisite amount, there's no point to say, oh, we have to combine the heiter with the isur. Just the forbidden item itself will be a problem. So the reason why Zeiri picked that example was to say that when Abaye says, now Abaye is just talking about specifically the Seor case, when it comes to putting something leavened on the altar, you're liable for any amount. There's no requisite amount needed there. Any little amount is going to make you liable. Comes Zeiri and says, no, you need a requisite amount of a kazayit. However, the kazayit can be made up of heter and isser together. So because he wanted to say that he disagrees with Abaye, he didn't use the example of chametz, eating chametz on Pesach, because he wanted to bring this leavening, this issue of something leavened on the altar to prove that point. So very simply, we have a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Zeiri. Is heiter mitztaref lisur a unique halacha just by Nazir? That's what Rabbi Yochanan says, and that's the opinion we're going to go in depth into right now. Or Zeiri, who holds that it applies in other cases as well. So now Rav Dimi, Yativ Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi was an Amora from Eretz Yisrael who would bring Torah also to Bavel, and he sat in Bavel, presumably, and he brought the Torah of Rabbi Yochanan to Babylonia and says, Rabbi Yochanan holds the following. Zeiri, by the way, was from Babylonia. So he says, Rabbi Yochanan said, this is a unique halacha by Nazir. Abaye hears this, and the rest of today's daf is going to be a discussion between Abaye and Rav Dimi. Abaye brings a question on Rav Dimi from a Mishna in Tvul Yom. We'll talk about what that is in a second. And from Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of that Mishna, which is going to show that that's going to contradict or seemingly contradict what Rav Dimi quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan about heiter mitztaref l'isur, because it's going to seem like heiter mitztaref l'isur in other things as well, in a truma related issue. So we now have a case. Okay, Tvul Yom is someone who goes to the mikvah. They're tameh, they're impure. They go to the mikvah in the morning, and the rest of that day until sunset, they're considered a Tvul Yom. Then certain things are still forbidden, even though they've gone to the mikvah. You have to wait till sunset, for example, to eat truma. It's the first Mishna in Shas about the kohanim. Right? When do you say Shema? When the kohanim go to eat their truma. And not only is it a problem if you eat truma, but if you touch truma while you're impure, while you're at Tvul Yom, you make that truma impure. You make truma impure, you disqualify it, and then it has to be burned, which we never really want to get to that situation because it's destroying sanctified items, which we don't like to do. But if we have no choice because it's tameh, we have to do it. So with that background, we're going to read this Mishna. Ha-mikpah. A mikpah is a porridge-like type thing. We have a mikpah shel truma. Okay, the first case is not really relevant. It's just to compare it to the second case. The first case, we have the majority of and from here we're going to get, by the way, especially tomorrow, into all sorts of laws of bitul, nullification of foods and kashrus and all that. Mikvah of truma, v'hashum v'hashemen shel chulin. So we have all these, what we call ta'arovo, mixtures of food. We have something that's majority truma. The porridge itself is made from items of truma. But the spices, the garlic, the oil, that stuff that gives it the flavor is chulin. Okay, now what happens? Nagat Tvul Yom b'miktzatan. If a Tvul Yom touches part of it, just touches the side of the side of the mixture. I don't know, he puts his hand in the pot, touches a little bit of the porridge. Pasalat kulam. The entire thing is disqualified because it was truma that was touched by a person who is impure. But here's the important case. If it's the reverse, mikvah shel chulin, the majority of it is non-sacred, not truma. V'hashuma v'hashemen shel truma, but the garlic and the oil is truma. V'nagat Tvul Yom b'mitzatan lo pasal ela makom haga'o. If the Tvul Yom touches part of the mixture, only the part that the Tvul Yom came in contact with is going to be impure. The rest of it is fine. Now, the fact that the rest of it is fine doesn't bother us. The question is, why the Hevinam ba? They asked a question on this Mishna. Mikom haga'o amai pasul. Why is the makom haga'o pasul? Wouldn't you say the majority of this is chulin and the truma is batel, is nullified to the chulin? Wouldn't you say that? Rabbi Yochanan, and here comes our big quote in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, which is going to contradict what Rabbi Yochanan said before. Matam, what's the reason for this? This is not batel. And what's the reason? Because if a zar were to eat this daisa, this mikvah, this porridge, if what's a zar? A non-kohen. Now, we're leaving tamei. Okay, we're basically making an analogy. If this were a regular case where we had porridge of truma mixed with chulin, nobody touched it, okay, but we had spices of chulin, of truma in the chulin mixture. Sorry, I hope I didn't say the words wrong. We have basically the majority of the mixture is fine. We have some oil and garlic, that is truma. If a zar were to eat a kezayit of this, that's what it sounds like Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Zar lokeh ala b'kezayit. If a non-kohen eats that, he will get lashes, or she will get lashes. Now, that means a non-kohen, right? Non-kohen is not allowed to eat truma, and if they eat it, they get lashes. So what does he say? A kezayit of this. Now, a kezayit of it is not made up of garlic and oil. A kezayit of this mixture is exactly what it sounds like. It's a heiter, mitztaref, heiter. We have a combination of permitted and non-permitted, and we're going to say that eating a kezayit of it is right. So now comes Abaye and he says, "My time, what's the reason? Lav mishum de heiter mitztaref heiter." Moving now to Amud Bet, is it not what Rabbi Yochanan is saying? Now, I didn't explain the whole thing of Rabbi Yochanan. What he says is the following. Here's his analogy. Since this mixture of porridge mixed with garlic and oil of truma, a non-kohen eats it, he's going to get lashes. Therefore, if somebody touches it who's impure, a different case entirely. If an impure person touches it, since it has enough truma in it to basically get a zar lashes, therefore, we're going to make this, we're going to be strict and say whatever the person touched is actually going to make it impure, even though there's only a little bit of truma in it. But again, that analogy is not really important. I mean, it's important to understand how we got to this. But what's going to be very important is that Rabbi Yochanan says, and this is his statement that we're going to deal with for the rest of today, Zar lokeh alav b'kezayit. The zar eating this aleha b'kezayit. The zar eating this will get lashes, a kezayit of this mixture, this combination, which really clearly says heiter combines with isser in a truma case, which means in a mixture of truma, which means that he doesn't say it's only true for Nazir. So that's basically when Rav Dimi taught what Rabbi Yochanan said. Abaye said that can't possibly be true because I heard the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that contradicts. So what's left for Rav Dimi to say? Rav Dimi can explain that you didn't understand properly what Rabbi Yochanan said here. When he said zar lo ke'aleh b'kezayit, he didn't mean that if you eat a kezayit of porridge, you're going to get lashes. What he meant was something else. Amar le lo. My kezayit, you misunderstood this kezayit he was talking about. He wasn't talking about eating an olive bulk of the mixture. De'ika kezayit b'chdei achila. Before I even get to explaining what this means, we have to understand what this concept of kezayit b'chdei achila process. We've come across it before, but I'll repeat it. I don't always assume we remember everything. This is generally used for other things. Let's just leave our case for a minute. If I eat something that's forbidden, okay, the easiest case to know this is Yom Kippur. Many people might know this, that on Yom Kippur, if you have to eat for some reason, you're sick, you're pregnant, you're nursing, and you need to eat for whatever reason, you can't, your doctor says you can't fast. So the first thing we tell you to do is eat what we call b'shiurim. What does it mean b'shiurim? It means avoid halachically eating, avoid eating in a way that's halachically problematic. How do you do that? You eat less than the requisite amount, less than a kazayit, and you eat that amount in periods of approximately every 9 minutes. So why is that? That's kazayit b'chdei achila pras. In order to be liable on Yom Kippur, you have to eat a kazayit. But not only do you have to eat a kazayit, imagine I ate a kazayit over the course of 10 hours, and altogether I ate a kazayit. You wouldn't say that's eating a kazayit because the time span is so wide, it's not like I really ate anything significant. If I eat a drop, a drop, a drop, a drop, it doesn't really mean anything. It's as if I didn't eat. So take that to what the Torah had, or the rabbis had to come up with an amount. What's the amount that they came up with? The amount it takes to eat a kazayit, in other words, we assume that an average person eats an olive bulk of food in the time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread. So we take the time it takes someone to eat a half a loaf of bread, if within that time you ate something that was forbidden, or by the way, this is also true for making a bracha after you eat, like Birkat Hamazon or any sort of bracha achrona, the grace after meals, is only made if you eat a kazayit within that time. If you eat over a very long period of time, then you don't actually, it's what I want to show is it's used for positive and negative. Number one, it's eating of a shiur that will be called a sin, let's say eating on Yom Kippur, or eating will be called eating, or I'll give you another example, kiddush b'makom suda. You have to eat kiddush in a place where you're eating a meal. A meal could be some sort of mizonot, it could be something that you made from grains, but you can't eat, let's say you're at a kiddush and you eat a cracker, and then 10 minutes you're schmoozing, 10 minutes later you eat another cracker, 10 minutes later you eat another cracker. Those don't combine for a requisite amount. You have to eat it within a certain period of time for it to be considered a meal, otherwise it's not. So this is a concept that's used in general, okay? Which is kizayit b'chdei achila pras, right? Like eating matzah, same thing, right? The whole idea of eating matzah, you have to eat a certain amount within a certain amount of time to be yotzei the mitzvah. Okay, that's another thing, right? The mitzvah matzah. So now we have this concept. Now what's kidei achila pras? It's the amount of time they came up with an amount, the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread. So what does this have to do with our topic? Well, first of all, how much time is that? There's a debate among the commentaries what exactly that time is. How long does it take to eat a half a loaf of bread, right? Seeing people at the same table, one person finishes in 2 minutes and the other person's still eating 20 minutes later. So they came up with an amount. There's a different debate. Is it 4 minutes? Is it 3 minutes? Is it 9 minutes? Is it, okay? Often we say 9 minutes. That's usually the average psak, the general psak in this case. Whatever amount of time it is, let's just call it 9 minutes. So now, what does this have to do with this? When Rabbi Yochanan said, Zar lo ke'aleha b'kezayit, you see the first half of the daf went very quickly. The second half's not going to be as quick. So the Zar eats kezayit b'chdei achilat pras, meaning in a Zar lo ke'aleha b'kezayit. When you have this porridge mixed with some garlic and oil of truma, but the bulk of it is actually not truma. Now, the Tvul Yom, if he touches, what he touches will be impure. Why? Why are we going to make that impure when the majority is chulin? Because if a zar were to eat this porridge and he were to eat it over the course of time of kidei achila pras, how much truma would he consume? He would consume about a kazayit. There's two ways to explain this, and it's a little bit tricky. Does it mean the Mishna is only referring to a case where there's enough garlic and oil that if you were to eat this over a course of 9 minutes, he would consume a kazayit of the truma? Or is it we just assume that's about the average, okay? That's the normal amount that a person puts of spices or flavorings into this mikvah, that it would be that in any case, okay? We're going to leave that question aside right now. It's not germane to our topic, but basically what he's saying is when Rabbi Yochanan said you're going to get lashes on this if you're a non-kohen who eats this, it's talking about eating a whole, it's not heiter mitztaref. It's not that you ate a kazayit of porridge. Absolutely not. If you ate a kazayit of porridge, you would not get lashes. But if you would eat an amount of porridge that a person normally eats over the course of 9 minutes, which would be, let's say, equivalent to a half a loaf of bread, you would eat that amount of porridge, and it would be a kazayit of the spices, the oil, not exactly spices, but the oil and the garlic. Okay, just the flavoring. That's why I call it spices. I don't want to confuse it. Later, we're going to get to spices. It's a little bit different. So that's Rav Dimi. Hopefully, you all understand that because that's going to be the basis of where we're going from now. This is the rest of the daf is built on this. So Rav Dimi's answer to Rabbi Yochanan is he doesn't mean heter mitztaref liser. He means that you actually eat an entire kazayit of the truma over a period, right? Because if you eat the porridge over a period of 9 minutes, you'll end up eating that amount of truma. To which Abaye says, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan said a zar that eats this will get lashes, which means it's a Torah law, because if you get lashes, you only get lashes by Torah law. There's lashes by rabbinic law, but that's called something else. That's called makat mardut. We saw that not so long ago. But it wouldn't be called lashes. Loke always means it's by Torah law, to which he says, B'achila prasto, right? This law, B'achila pras, is a Torah law. So first of all, the comment, Tosfot says, what do you mean? Of course, it's a Torah law. We see it in all these other places that it doesn't exactly say it in the Torah, but it is treated like a Torah law because, for example, you're only going to get lashes on Yom Kippur, or liable on Yom Kippur if you ate a kazayit b'chtei pras. That obviously means it's Torah. What he means is, what Tosfot explains is that what he means is, normally, okay, now on Yom Kippur, we're not talking about everything you eat is asher. Here we're talking about in a combination. In a ta'arovet, in a porridge, when you have a small amount of this, but you eat the small amount of isser over a course of 9 minutes, you'll be liable because you ended up eating a whole kazayit. That's what he wants to say. Is that really on a Torah level? This eating of isser kind of, I would say in the words of Purim coming up, masqueraded, covered up in a combination of permitted items. And altogether, though, in eating this permitted item, you ended up devouring a kazayit of isser in a time period of 9 minutes. That's a doraita law. To which Rav Dimi simply says, yes, it's a Torah law. Now, this is the issue that's going to keep us till tomorrow's daf, which is, here comes Abaye with a number of questions on that assumption. The assumption that Rav Dimi makes, which is eating a kazayit b'chtei pras within a combination of something else. And if you eat that item over the course of 9 minutes, you'll end up consuming a kazayit's worth of isur. Is that really a Torah law? So his first question is, Amai plige Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Eliezer b'kuta chabavli. You remember this kuta chabavli? It's that kind of disgusting food that the Babylonians ate, or at least the people in Israel thought it was disgusting. It was made up of like a sour milk and moldy bread and salt. It has in it. It has all sorts of halachic issues for basar b'chalav because it's got milk in it. It's got a little bit of bread in it, so it's a chametz issue, which is our issue today. Which is, why did the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer about a kuta chabavli? Rabbi Eliezer says if you ate a kuta chabavli, okay, you're going to be liable on Pesach, even if you, right, as long, because it has, if you eat a kazayit, if it has in it a kazayit that could be eaten b'chtei pras. And the rabbis say, no, you're not liable. So now, so again, this means the kutach is a bigger substance. Now, normally it was eaten as a dip. Okay, that's going to be important for understanding Rav Dimi's answer. And it was very sharp and very strong. Okay, you can't really eat a large amount of it. But if you were to eat a kazayit if you were to eat an amount within 9 minutes, like a large amount of it, you would, like this ratio that we were discussing before, there's a kazayit of breadcrumbs in it, or bread. So he says, why do the rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer thinks it's a problem, that amount. The rabbis say it's not a problem because it's, even though it's got kazayit b'chtei pras, meaning, again, if you would eat this whole substance in a course of 9 minutes, you would consume a kazayit of bread in it, right? For the amount that would be, let's say, equal to a half a loaf of bread. If you take the amount of kutach, that's half a loaf of bread, and you would eat that over the course of 9 minutes, like you would eat bread, there would be a kazayit of bread inside that kutach. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's not. So the rabbis say not. So why would the rabbis say it's not if this halacha is a derived halacha? To which Rav Dimi says, that's a unique case. Why? There isn't kazayit within 9 minutes because you don't eat kutach in amounts like you eat bread. You don't eat it at the pace, at the rate that you eat bread. If you gobble it down like you would eat bread. Okay, let's say you did. You're insane, basically. Nobody eats it like that. You can't eat it like that. So if you're going to eat it like that, by the way, it's interesting that Rav Dimi is saying this. He's from Israel more. He lived in Israel more than he was back and forth, but maybe because he was from Israel, right? This is like when you have this very sharp, right, spicy foods. You could see someone from a certain culture can devour and down that kind of stuff, and someone from another culture might say, I can't eat a little bit of that in that amount of time, right? So it could be it was a little bit of that, but I don't know. But anyway, he says basically, right? So if you're going to wolf it down in that amount and really devour kazayit in that amount of time, you're so unique that we're not going to even make you responsible, because this is a very interesting concept. We're going to treat you like anyone else, who no human really eats in that kind of way. And if you're going to eat it like people do, which is dip a little bit in it, well, you never eat that amount of a kazay. You would never get up to a kazayit of bread within 9 minutes of the little bread that's mixed up in that kuta. So basically, he says, don't ask me questions from kuta chabad. Now we're going to have two more questions, which are similar to each other. And we're going to explain the first one. The second one is really more explained in tomorrow's daf, but we'll start it. So the second source Abaye brings against Rav Dimi is the following. We have two, what's the word? Help me out with the English, but it's two, where you grind the spices in. So you have two mortars, thank you. Two mortars where you have your spices ground up. We don't know which is truma, which is chulin. So you've taken spices that are truma spices and chulin spices, and you have them each in their mortars. And then you have two pots in front of you. And then you have two pots. You have a pot, let's say, of soup, of truma and of chulin. And one mortar falls in, the contents of one mortar falls into one pot, and the contents of the other falls into the other. And we don't know which fell into the truma pot and which fell into the chulin pot. Shtehen mutarot. They're both permitted. What does it mean they're both permitted? It means the truma pot is permitted to kohanim only because it's definitely truma. The chulin one is permitted to non-kohanim. Why? Maybe truma spices fell into it. Shani Omel, the Breita says, because I can say, meaning we can say, we can assume, it's a crazy assumption, right? It's a 50-50 chance. We don't know. But you can assume and claim, the chulin fell into the chulin, the truma fell into the truma. Now, comes Abaye's question. If you're going to say eating a kazayit process by Torah, how can you possibly say that I say? Meaning that I say, how can we possibly say chulin fell into chulin and truma fell into truma? Basically, you're going to end up with this pot of soup that has truma, possibly has truma spices in it. So he says it must be because if you eat kazayit, right, what would happen? If you would eat the soup over the course of 9 minutes, you probably consume, the assumption is, again, they're making a certain assumption here, which I just have to put it out there. This is an assumption. Why they assume that, I don't know. But their assumption is that the spices basically make up the amount, or filling up the soup to the amount that if you were to eat soup over the course of 9 minutes, you would devour a kazayit of spices that are truma. If that's the case, how can we if you say, you said Rav Dimi in explaining Rabbi Yochanan, that kazayit b'chtei achila pras is a Torah law, then you're basically violating the Torah. And what does that mean? Well, we don't know if you're violating the Torah. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe the chulin fell into chulin, maybe the truma fell into the truma, but maybe not. Maybe the truma fell into the chulin. If the truma fell into the chulin, what would we call this? Safek d'oraita l'chumra. When we have a doubt about a Torah law, we're going to basically be strict. So if you say eating kazayit b'chtei achila pras is d'oraita, which you just said, that was the whole premise that Abaye is questioning in so many different ways. First the Kutach Habavli, now this, and we'll see further. Then we'd have to be strict here. The only reason we're lenient is because it's rabbinic. So comes Rav Dimi with a good retort. He says, wait a minute. You want to say that, okay, let's go back. I explained Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Zar lokeh alav, because I explained, why is he lokeh? Because he ate a kazayit b'chdei achila pras, and it's not heiter mitztaref lis. And then you claimed, how could you say that's derived? And that's what you're trying to question. You claim that what? Rabbi Yochanan says, heiter mitztaref le'isser, even in truma, chulin, things like that. So comes Rav Dimi, let's read it inside. He said, elamai. So what do you want to say if you think I'm wrong? Heiter mitztaref le'isser. Well, then your theory is that heiter combines with isur on a Torah level, because that's how you're explaining why he would get lashes in Rabbi Yochanan, which would also be a Torah law. In this case, you now have heiter of chulin with isur mixed in of truma. And according to you, if I eat even a kazayit of that soup, I'll be liable. And then, of course, it's a safek d'oraita l'chumra. And how can they possibly permit this? So he basically says, it's very nice you're questioning me with this, but I'll throw it right back at you. To which he comes up with his answer that's going to resolve it for both of them. Ella, he says, am I right? So if heter mitztaref l'isur, what you're saying, I didn't finish the question. Am I rinan shani omer? It's the same question for you. Why would you say we're lenient here? Elamai. So he says, so what is it then? Hanach l'truma tavlin dirabanan. There's a different reason here. This is spices. Now, when it comes to truma, what is liable? What do you have? Where's truma in Torah law? So it talks about reshit tigancha tiroshcha v'yitzchachecha. There's a basic debate among the commentaries whether we understand that the Torah law of truma only applies to dagan, which is the 5 grains, tirosh, which is wine, anything, grapes, and yitzhar, which are olives. Okay, before we had oil, that would be olive oil. Okay, and shum, where we have the shum and the shemen, you could say, so some people say that Torah law applies not only, there's a whole debate, does it apply to fruits as well? Does it apply to vegetables as well? There's a whole question about all those things. But nobody thinks it applies to spices on the Torah level. Spices is something different. So basically, Rav Dimi said this is not a question, not on me, and actually not on you, because you didn't think it was a question on you, but it really is a question on you as well. Not a question on either of us, because this is all rabbinic law, because this is truma on spices. And with that, so the kuta was a case where you would never eat it in a time span of kedei achila pras. And this case was a case where it's not doraita at all. The whole base halacha isn't doraita, and that's why. If it were doraita, then you would have a question on me, but it's not Torah law. To which Abaye brings a doraita case. Eitive shtei kupot. There's 2 baskets. Echad shel truma v'echad shel chulin. The assumption here is that we're talking about something like wheat. You have a basket of wheat. Wheat is definitely, that's part of the grains. So you have 2 baskets. One is truma, one is chulin, just like your pots. U'lifnehem shnei se'in. And then you have a pile of a se'ah's worth, that's a measurement. Echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma. So then you had these 2 piles, one of truma, one of chulin. V'naflu elu l'toch elu. And again, the piles of the se'ah falls into this big basket. Shnehem utalim. Same thing. Now here you have Torah law. You can't say this is spices. This is rabbinic. Shani omer chulin l'toch chulin aflu truma l'toch truma nafla, as the source says, and we assume the chulin went into the chulin. You can be lenient here, basically. To which again, now here again, the question's going to be on both sides. So, but really, it's Abaye asking the question on Rav Dimi, and he says, or some people say, we should really change it too, because that's what he said. If you say, if you see there's an aleph there, the notes change it, the Bach changes it to doraita. If you say, same problem here. Again, assuming, there's this assumption here, that the ratio of the se'ah to the kupa is that if you were to eat this amount in 9 minutes, you would devour a kazayit of the truma. And if that makes it a safek d'oraita, because process d'oraita, you're going to have a problem. Now, why is it not a problem to Abaye? You're going to have to wait till tomorrow, and Abaye is going to explain. I can explain this according to my interpretation of heter mitztaref l'isur, because I'll tell you that this isn't heter mitztaref l'isur in this case because of the way it's combined, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But according to you, this will be a problem, and we'll have to wait to see tomorrow. Number one, how exactly Abaye says it's not a problem for him, only for Rav Dimi. And then we'll see how Rav Dimi actually resolves this question as well. And then we'll have more more questions of Abaye on Rav Dimi about this whole concept, and we'll get into all sorts of basic, like I said, basic concepts when it comes to nullification, about tan ki kal, when you have flavor in something, and all sorts of basic laws of kashrut that come up in Masechet Nazir. Okay, let's do a quick review of the doc. We started with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that heiter mitztaref le'isser is only in a case of Nazir. We have Rabbi Zeiri, who says it applies in other cases as well. He particularly mentioned one case. We said, why didn't he mention another? And then we said, you want to teach us something else? Then Rav Dimi taught the halacha of Rabbi Yochanan, and Abaye started questioning him and saying, what about this Mishna in Tvul Yom and this statement that Rabbi Yochanan himself said about that Mishna, which seemed to imply that he thinks heiter was mitztaref le'isser, because he said, a zar would get lashes, and that's why the Tvul Yom will touch it and mess it up, at least the part he touched. Since if a zar were to eat this combination, he would be liable. Why would he be liable when there's a minority amount of truma in it? Because it must be heiter mitztaref le'isser, and that's why if he eats a kazayit of it. To which Rav Dimi said, no, he didn't eat a kazayit of the mixture. He ate a kazayit of the added stuff, the garlic and the oil. And he ate it in a time period of 9 minutes. And as if he eats the porridge in 9 minutes, that amount will include, we assume, a kazayit of the forbidden item, which then Abaye says, is that a doraita law? Because otherwise, why would he get lashes? And it's trying to say this isn't doraita, this whole thing, and therefore he shouldn't get lashes. To which Rav Dimi says it is doraita, and therefore I can't explain Rabbi Yochanan in this way. To which Abaye started mentioning questions. Number one, the kutaf habavli, which he said is Rav Dimi answers unique exception. Then he brought the spices case of truma, to which he said that's only derived. And then we brought this last case, which we'll better understand tomorrow, about where it's not spices, it's more like a grain, and yet we still say it. And how's Rav Dimi going to explain that? Why are we lenient if we have this principle, safek doraita l'chumra? We're always strict when it comes to a doubt about Torah law, and Rav Dimi thinks this is a Torah law, so how could that possibly be? We'll wait till tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.